Envisioning the Future, Sustainable Solutions for Filmmakers. The process of programming for this festival kind of starts with surveying the community. So we talk to a lot of different people at different organizations, our friends at Women Make Movies and Southern Documentary Fund and all over, right? And we have these conversations about what's happening in the field. So we talk to organizations, thought leaders, and distributors about what's taking hold. In terms of the film curation, our season begins with CPH Docs. Shout out to the Danes who are here. Are the Danes still here? Okay, they're not here yet. Oh, one, I see one, holding it down. All right, and so that's when kind of we start to unravel. It's like a ball of yarn, and we start to unravel it, and it's interesting what comes up. And what came up this year was the fact that everybody was having a conversation about following the money. They were all talking about distribution, right? And so we have a panel later on about distribution. But out of that conversation about distribution also came this conversation about filmmakers are in trouble. It's like, you know, there was the golden age of documentary where we could get the Netflix deals, and then that just started to kind of consolidate. And so we thought that we would start today by addressing the symptom. And the symptom is that filmmakers are struggling. Later on in the day, we'll kind of parse it apart and have conversations about distribution, et cetera, et cetera. But how are we going to sustain ourselves? And so this session is the proverbial oxygen mask. Here to lead this conversation is Malkia K. Lydia, my dear friend. She's produced short films installed at the Smithsonian Institution, the National Civil Rights Museum, and other historical centers. Currently, she's directing 2 long-form documentaries that combine participatory, verite, and archival methods. Malkia is a seasoned archival producer, having supported investigative, true crime, biographical, sports, and music documentaries in that capacity. So, welcome, Malkia, to Double Exposure.
How's that? Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Before I do that, in case it's useful for anybody in the room or somebody encountering a recording at a later time, I'm going to do a visual description. So I am a medium height African-American woman with tan skin, and the twist out afro hair is cooperating today. So that's how I'll describe myself. And I'm just going to call up the folks who you're going to be talking with today. So we've got Lailane Gadia, who is the operations director at Asian American Documentary Network, or ADOC as the cool people call it. We have Zeena Starbuck, project coordinator for the Independence Project and the Democracy Story Unit at Doc Society. And we have Brian Newman, who is founder at Subgenre. And then we have Jacqueline Olive. She is an independent filmmaker and founder of Tell It Media. So let's welcome our folks. And again, thank you all for being here. So I'm kind of going to do the thing I do when I'm in the classroom where I stand and sit. So just ignore me. But I can't do the podium, so I'm going to do this. But I am going to just, you know, when we talk about sustainable solutions for filmmakers, that can mean different things to different folks. So just to, you know, I'm not going to try to narrow it in too much, but just to set a little bit of a tone around that and thinking about it, what do we mean by sustainability? That we, you know, obviously that we can sustain ourselves monetarily, materially, as we do this work. That the work sustains us, you know, in terms of feeding our purpose, creativity, our aspirations, and honors our dignity. And then also, I would add, and I'm not alone in this, I'm sure, sustainability in that we are contributing to a body of independent documentary or public interest documentary, if you will, that is itself sustained and replenished and valued, and here's key, available to the public at large. So I'm going to kind of put that out there as my sort of framework, and we'll kind of poke at that or what have you. But just to bring it to like closer to the ground a little bit, because the monetary issue, the livelihood issue is real. You can answer this by raising your hand, or you can just answer it quietly in your head. It's all good. I'll answer. I'll participate. So who in the room has a side hustle, you know, the thing that actually earns you money, that allows you to make films, or at least think about making films, or independent films, I should say. What's the next one I have here? Who is in a moment or has had a moment where you thought you might leave this profession? And then finally, who is in the moment or in this mood of, or has had it at some point, that whatever it takes, this is what I got to do. You know, I couldn't leave it if I tried. Okay. So we'll just want to get you all engaged, and we're going to try our best to make sure there's plenty of time to talk, so that you not only can ask questions and follow up on what the panelists have to say, but that you can maybe share some of your hopes for your own filmmaking careers or what the field looks like. And I would be remiss, okay, I have to do this. This is my note in the margins. We're in the US. We just had an election. And this moment, we can't not, you know, we can't ignore this moment. For those of us who are making public interest documentary, investigative documentary, certainly the prospect that one of our biggest sort of sources of funding or visibility in terms of public television might not look the way it does now, or has looked for us in the near future. And then even when I think back to late 2016, early 2017, how there was a chilling effect even in terms of funders who are not necessarily public media funders in the US, in terms of shying away from work that seemed too political, too controversial, you know, too not Midwestern everyday folksy, you know what I mean? So, you know, we do get to talk about that. We're gonna talk about that, but we really do want to make sure this is a space where you can dream, where you can express, and it's not just focused about this moment, and not even just focused on the United States. So, with that, I'm gonna do first. We talked about this in advance. We're gonna do a quick round so you can kind of hear everybody's voices and responses to a quick question, and then we'll do a little deeper dive with each of the people here. You'll hear more about their work and why they're bringing a really valuable perspective to this conversation. Does that sound good? Work? Okay. Let's see, and well, we'll just go down the row here. So if you could just repeat your name for folks. I'm one of those people who has to hear a name twice for it to stick. Self-define the stage of your filmmaking career, whatever words you want to use, and then I just have a true or false question. We were talking a lot about livelihood. In your view, a sustainable film practice or filmmaking career means earning a sufficient livelihood exclusively from filmmaking, true or false, in your opinion? All right.
Hi everyone, my name is Lailane Gadia. I am the operations director of the Asian American Documentary Network. I'm also a financial professional, so I help people one-to-one with their finances. And then I'm also a producer. I'm an early career producer. And for me, I think I came into this space, you know, I started out, I was an economics major in college, and I went into the banking industry and mortgage banking, so I did that full time for 6 years, and then I spent, you know, nights and weekends in the creative field, supporting Asian American filmmakers through film festivals, started producing short narrative projects. And then when I left the banking industry in 2018, wanted to really pursue the creative life and help stories come to life through producing and being able to, you know, work with the Asian American Documentary Network since 2019. And so that's really where I, you know, sit. And then at the same time, you know, knowing that as well, that needing to be able to support a livelihood, you know, I wanted to continue in the financial industry as an independent financial professional. So I also do that at the same time.
And so, in terms of your the filmmaking aspect of it, you consider where are you in, like, what stage are you in? Would you say?
Yeah, I would say I'm more on the earlier career side. I mean, I've done short films. I working on my first feature. So,
Okay, yeah. And in that, do you, in your mind, sustainable filmmaking career means I earn all my living from that exclusively. Is that true or false in your mind?
Not exclusively, that's also false.
Okay. All right, so we'll just move down the line and then we'll come back and do a little deeper dive.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zeena Starbuck. My visual description would be I'm sitting down, but I am a very tall, white woman with glasses and frizzy brown hair in a very bright jumpsuit. I work for Docs Society. I'm based in London, but you will notice that my accent is American because I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. However, my work has been in London and my life has been in London for about 20 years now, and I guess I would be bringing a more global perspective to this panel because a lot of the work I do with Doc Society is as a member and researcher for the Disco Network, which I'll explain a bit more, but it's an international alliance of cultural organizations who work together, think together, research together, and advocate for sustainable solutions for our field. In terms of my career, I'm not a filmmaker. I have a research background. I used to do research for political nonprofits, for podcasts in the US and also in the UK. And I kind of shifted over as a freelancer to Doc Society and some of actually the Disco members. I was working with them for a long time, and then I finally joined full-time about a year and a half ago. So I would say I'm early stage in this field, although I've been kind of adjacent to it for a very long time. With the true-false question, I think I gave it some thought, and actually the stance I would take, and I think my organization would take, is that you cannot have a true-false binary when it comes to sustainability. That sustainability is, for every filmmaker around the world, is going to look different and feel different. And I think that will depend on, when we're thinking about mental health, when we're thinking about the responsibilities you have in your personal life, maybe sustainability could look like having a practice where you can take parental leave, where you can have access to healthcare. And for many of our comrades in filmmaking, it also will just be about safety, about having safe passage to make the stories that you want to tell, about not being at risk of going to jail or being persecuted. And I would just, encourage, when we talk about sustainability, to take an empathetic approach and thinking about all of our filmmakers who are in very different situations than us and who face, really intense challenges when it comes to just the act of, sharing information.
So Brian and Jackie, if you want to continue the trend and just say the sort of, what would you include in that definition of sustainability, we'll go ahead and do that in this round.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Newman, and my visual descriptions, I'm a white man with brown hair with a lot of gray and glasses and a big Band-Aid on my elbow. And I run a company called Subgenre, and it's a small company, 8 people. We work with major brands that are making films, predominantly documentaries, but also fiction, and help them with distribution and marketing. So a lot of my work is distribution and marketing, a little bit also connecting brands to filmmakers to make the films they want to make. And but prior to that, I've been in the independent film world, running nonprofits, like an organization that gave the Rockefeller Fellowships. I was CEO of the Tribeca Film Institute, have been on the board of many documentary organizations and film festivals. And so I come completely from the independent film world, but now work almost exclusively in the brand world, which is what has made my career sustainable. And I think that it is a spectrum in terms of sustainability, but I definitely feel like there's a small group of filmmakers that are not exclusively, there's some notable exceptions, but a lot of them are older white men like myself that have very sustainable careers in the field. But it's become much more like a 1% that gets to have that sustainable career. And a lot of people need to have either some other job or they're doing work like brand films, which we can talk about in a little bit, to help make them sustainable, where they have some kind of side hustle, and I'm seeing that more and more.
Hi, I'm Jackie. I'm Jackie Olive. I'm an independent filmmaker. I came to this work through a number of careers, and I was a therapist at one point, an on-air DJ.
I forgot that.
Yeah, I worked for an airline. I was a firefighter. And believe it or not, there's even more. But really looking for work that I love that was going to sustain me over the years to be able to do it for the rest of my life, and that became filmmaking. I started out, it's been almost 20 years in journalism and filmmaking. So I started out in journalism in 2002, working for an NBC affiliate in my hometown. And then graduated with my master's in documentary film in 2007, so that gives you a sense about how long I've been a filmmaker. And it's been that long, and yet I consider myself mid-career because it took me 10 years to make my first film, Always in Season, which premiered at Sundance and had the tons of support from film organizations like Tribeca.
And won a special jury prize.
That it did. It was a gift. And foundations, and so that's been a huge part of what's made my career sustainable. I think, for me, I think what would make it sustainable, the feel sustainable for independent filmmakers, is for there to be a structure that is at least as built out as the structure around monetizing our content and the transactional relationships around our content. And so how do we sustain the professional so that if we're supporting diverse stories and diverse storytelling, we need the professionals to be able to be there to continue to make those stories over a career. And so to spend at least as much attention on that. And part of it is that there was never a structure. Documentary filmmakers were originally white men who made films as a hobby from the very beginning, who had money and were able to do that. And so we are definitely entrepreneurs, which is the part that I embrace and that I love. But we are entrepreneurs on a different scale than, say, the tech industry, which is, an entrepreneur can, on a good deal or a good investment, make millions of dollars. And we're trying to sustain an income of $100,000 to $800,000 just to be able to support ourselves and our families. And so the wins are smaller. And so what is it that we do to keep filmmakers independent and in control of their content and their editorial voice, but to create structures in which they're able to continue to do that over the course of a career, not just content to content.
Thank you, thank you. So you see what we're working with here today. We're going to try to do a deep dive, well, a mini deep dive with each person, and then kind of open it back up. So definitely prepare your answers to some of these questions or your questions for the panel. So I'm going to start with you, Lailane. So obviously you wear multiple hats. We kind of all do in some regard, but you are actively right now producing films, and you have a pretty, you say early career, but you have a pretty substantial portfolio. When I looked at the films that you've helped steward to fruition, you are a financial services educator and consultant, and we're doing that before the filmmaking part, and you're operations director at ADOC, which is a filmmaker-facing organization that services filmmakers. So you've got a lot of perspective. What have you seen? What have you heard? About sustainability within this profession. What are some of your kind of takeaways from what you've observed and heard?
Hi, everyone. I actually didn't give my visual description, so I'll give that now. I am a 5'2" Filipina woman with long black hair in a green blazer, pink button-up, and blue pants. I think for me, being able to wear multiple hats, starting out in the financial industry and wanting to move more into helping filmmakers bring their stories to life and being part of ADOC, where it's a filmmaker collective, if you don't know, that supports, now we have currently over 1,700 Asian American documentary filmmakers and those that work in the documentary field and nonfiction space. And so, and that really happened within the last couple of years where, I've been interfacing with a lot of filmmakers and supporting filmmakers directly. And, when I'm speaking to a lot of the filmmakers, because I support the membership and in meetups and being able to give them, help support them in opportunities within ADOC, a lot of the things I'm hearing from a lot of filmmakers, is a lot about filmmaker sustainability. How do I make a living in this space? And I think a lot of, we've been seeing an influx of a lot more emerging makers or early career filmmakers who don't have, the support, the access to really, get their films off the ground. And I think also for me, coming from, the financial space and wanting to help people one-to-one with their finances, I've been able to, as I'm talking to filmmakers, a lot of them are like, how do I make a living? How do I, have a sustainable career? And, for me, wanting to help filmmakers, even just understand how the money that is coming in, how do I make that, work for me? And that is partly, being able to understand how, money works. And
Well, I want to ask you with that. We understand she's not offering financial advice right now, but like, what's like number one and number two thing you're like, if I could just get every filmmaker, independent filmmaker to do this, like the one or two thing you would say they need to be doing to get their financial house in order, what is that you would say?
Yeah, I mean, the two things is pay yourself first, which I know is hard in the industry, but really any money coming in, pay yourself first, I say 10%, and then two, build an emergency fund, because, most people don't have, $500 in their bank account to support, an emergency when it comes to their bills. So being able to build that emergency fund to at least your first 1,000.
And then I want to, because we're talking about our individual experiences, but we're also talking about institutions and organizations that are hopefully making this work more sustainable. So ADOC is a perfect example. So what I want to do is, if we could go to, if maybe you could just set up briefly the short microdoc we're going to see, because I want to offer some examples of the way ADOC is intervening to make careers more sustainable. So,
yeah, I think, for at ADOC, during the pandemic, with all the anti-Asian sentiments, we really, two initiatives were born, our Impact Initiative and our Storytelling Initiative. And through our, the clip that you're gonna see is from our Storytelling Initiative, where in 2020, we wanted to support our filmmakers and give them, a little bit of resources. ADOC doesn't have a lot of resources, but we wanted to use the resources that we had to support our filmmakers to go out there, create these microdocs that are just 2 minutes to, share the stories in their communities. And, we've done that since 2020. And this is our third iteration of our microdocs series. And so we supported 6 filmmakers. And this one short is called Ohio is in the Heart by Sonia
we'll get
Desai. And
yeah,
so
Sonia
and so she's it's a mother-daughter story based in Ohio about bringing education through K through 12.
So we can go with that clip.
We're in Ohio.
Right there.
Okay. Look how far that is from New York. That's where my parents landed. So keep one finger there on New York.
On New York?
Right. And then keep it there. We're going to turn. I should have gone the other way. Okay, we'll go the other way. Let's go the other way. I'll keep my finger here. Now you find Manila.
I found Manila.
Okay, so look where your finger is and look where my finger is. They are literally
Across the world.
It's across the world. That is where Lolo and Lola traveled.
The chair now calls on Lisa Factora Borchers and Rosaria Borchers. And you may begin.
My name is Rosario Factora Borchers. I'm here to ask you to support House Bill 171 so I can learn more about my family's history and how they came to this country. I also want to be able for my friends to learn about my family, especially my grandparents. I call them Lolo and Lolo, which means grandfather and grandmother in Tagalog.
Knowing all of this about Lolo and Lola, how does that affect how you decide to use your voice in the world?
What runs through the family is a big story, and I want to have a big story like the rest of my family. And that encouraged me. Sometimes it makes me even stronger to use my voice. And I thought in my head right before I was going to speak, I thought, why couldn't other kids do this? Like, I want other kids to have the same experience that I did.
And how would you feel in the classroom if they're saying, all right, today we're going to be talking about Filipino Americans and Filipino immigrants who came to this country?
This is my favorite subject of all time.
So I think all of us know in the room, especially for early and mid-career folks, the opportunity to be a part of something, even if it's not the full-scale project you want to do, but something that gets national visibility, that adds some, credibility to your portfolio, and where there's camaraderie and a cohort environment, all of that can be beneficial. So that's not necessarily in the same direction as talking about how we get compensated, by the networks, but I believe, and I think ADOC believes it's an important piece of the puzzle that we've got to talk about. How do we support that happening in various groups and communities? So we're going to move forward to Zeena, who is, again, with Doc Society, but she's going to focus in on a particular piece of the work she's doing, and she's bringing in some of what she's hearing outside the U.S., and for that one, she has a series of images, some slides that is just going to play in the background as she speaks with us. Is that? Oh, I think that's a great thing. I'm all about multi-textures going on. So we're just going to let that roll so you can kind of, see that as she's talking. So I'm going to jump to the fact that you are in a field-facing organization, but also filmmaker-facing. So, not necessarily the industry as in the platforms or distributors or commercial entities, but a really important role. So talk about how this work that you do connects with you guys, your vision of what filmmaker sustainability and what an ecosystem that's sustainable can look like.
Thank you. Doc Society, as many of you probably know, one of our primary focuses is funding. We fund independents. We fund independent filmmakers, but also podcasts, and we're increasingly broaching out into VR and AR as well. But the work that I do within Doc Society is actually primarily with our Disco Alliance. So for those of you who don't know about the Disco Alliance, I'd like to share a little bit right now, and then talk a bit more about the Independence Project, which is one of our research projects that actually focuses in on sustainability. So Disco is a network of independent cultural organizers. Our members include Ambulante, Aflamina, DocuBox, Docs MX, Doc SP, Indocs, and of course my organization, Doc Society. Collectively, we support over 2,000 filmmakers in over 40 countries. We host leading festivals, markets, and also provide world-class training and mentorship. And I do have to mention this, that many in our network come from regions where independence has been crushed or is being desperately fought for. Together, we're at a time of profound global uncertainty and grief. Some in our network right this minute are living under the threat of bombs and attacks, and as a network, any space we take up, we feel the need to bring Palestine and all genocides and war into the space and to foreground the solidarity that we need to have as a documentary community. In Disco especially, we're eager to discuss and talk beyond our cultural institutions and individual localities and think about big global systemic changes, foregrounding decentralization and decolonization. One of the things that kicked off this network was the Independence Project, which I was brought into primarily as a researcher. The goal of the project was to think about what does independence mean to filmmakers in our big global community. We felt that the word independence was kind of being co-opted, and we were not in the community actively defining it. We wanted to hear from filmmakers if this word was important to them and how they would define independence. If they did not self-describe as independent, then what did they self-describe as? And we did this through conducting 51 interviews with filmmakers from around the world. I think in total we did it in 8 different languages. And my role in the project was to conduct all of the English language interviews and to coordinate the rest of the interviews. We spoke to people from every region, and actually primarily of the 51 interviews, it was mostly from the global majority. So you can actually see the first results of this work with the Independence Project Manuscript, Volume 1, which is available online if you go to independence-project.org.
And you're going to share some actual testimonies from it, right?
Yes, I would love to. As you will have seen from the slides, we have, now that we've published this manuscript, which, you know, the interviews took place over the last year and a half, we've been going to festivals. We were at CPH, we were at Getting Real, recently we were at Docs by the Sea in Indonesia, and we've just been taking this manuscript around and reading testimonies from filmmakers about their views of sustainability and their asks of the field, but also, you know, why they do the work they do. And I think it's really illuminating, and it has informed Doc Society and the DISCO members in terms of when we think about sustainability, what does that mean? Because it is really, really broad. I'll just read a few quotes. So this is from a filmmaker, Michel Zongo, who this interview is done in French. He's based in West Africa. He said, "You might deal with subjects as a filmmaker that are presented in isolation outside of a national context, that go against the principles of a state, a government, or an organization of any kind. From that moment, you can be excluded from certain funding systems, certain distribution structures, or certain recognition mechanisms. Because this independent point of view that we defend goes against the interests of an organization or a government, especially in African countries where freedom of expression is not widespread, even throughout Europe and other countries in Asia, the independence documentary filmmakers are fighting for is still a battleground. However, economic independence is also essential. It must find the means to make films without pressure, without concessions, standing by this point of view. And that's not always the case when there are organizations or grants, acquisition by television, or films about our work. Of course, that can affect the independence of our point of view. It can become fragile because if we don't accept it, if we don't do things the way the TV companies want or how the funding body wants it, you might not be able to make the film." This is a sentiment we heard in a lot of the interviews, that for them, sustainability is actually not so much about finance, it's about creative freedom. Other things you'll see in this manuscript and that we've heard through the interviews are sustainability can be as simple as, you know, not being forced to take on a co-producer from the global north as a filmmaker in the global majority.
Wow, and that's always offered as a solution for us, for our sustainability, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was, I think there's a filmmaker in here, Aria, who says that pretty explicitly, like she does not want to take on co-producers for her projects, or rather, she wants to do it as a choice. She wants agency. Sustainability can be about agency. For people, it can be about paying the bills. There's an American filmmaker in here who talks about, you know, she has to sacrifice her independence and take on filmmaking projects that she does not feel passionate about because she needs to pay the bills, send her kids to school, keep the lights on. And then there are people who just, you know, talk about sustainability to do a variety of things. Not all of them want to just be filmmakers. They might want to be teachers. They might want to be activists. It is such a broad definition. And I do need to foreground, though, that DISCO, as a network, when we think about sustainability, we really do think about safety and security. We really think about how do we make sure filmmakers are granted safe passage? How do we protect them from legal and physical harm? And, you know, I just want to say as I close out that we have just had this election, and it is really scary. I know a lot of us are thinking about what happens to public interest media, what happens to our funding institutions, and at Doc Society, we actually have DISCO partly as a kind of North Star, because the members of the DISCO organization, they have been living under tyrants, under authoritarianism, without any funding at all. They have been having to deal with safety and security issues. They have filmmakers who are at risk every day, and they still get the work done. Filmmakers are gonna keep making their projects by any means necessary, and we have a wonderful network of organizations who actually have been doing this work that we might be facing the risks of. So it's a really good time to listen to our global community, to lift them up, and to let their practice lift us up as well as we go into this next chapter.
Thank you. And thank you, Lailane, as well, for what you all are bringing, expanding this picture. You know, we're not going to get to all the answers in this hour or so, but hopefully we're, you know, this is fodder for what's to come. Yeah, because we got work to do. So we're going to go to Brian now, who gave you a bit about his background in Tribeca Film Institute and running a fellowship, and is now more so working in the branded space, but really you get called upon a lot, Brian, to talk about, I'm gonna jump to, for just a moment, the branded content piece. I remember, like, just in some of my networks that I'm involved in, people will be talking about it, and I was like, oh, how dare they? How dare they bring that into this discussion? Talking about money, and now I'm middle-aged, and I'm like, oh, okay. But if you could just, as these slides just sort of play, this is from your 2023 sort of highlights, is that correct? Yeah. Just, yeah, what is the branded content piece? Will it save us? And just, maybe like a case study without names of how someone has used this as a way to make their work sustainable.
Yeah, so the slides that are showing are just some films we worked on in the past year that got distribution, and a little bit about them. And so you can see it's a broad mix. Some of those are fiction films, but several documentaries as well. And in each of these cases, they're real movies that premiered at film festivals as broad as Tribeca, South by Southwest, festivals like this, Sundance, Cannes. They've sold to traditional distributors and major streamers, and they were completely financed for the most part by brands. And there are no product placement. They're not trying to sell a product. It's about values alignment. And so the one example that flashed by there a second ago, there's a film that John Deere, the tractor company, paid for called Odd Hours, No Pay, Cool Hat, which is a saying among volunteer firefighters, because that's what you get, is odd hours, no pay, and a cool hat. And the reason that they funded that film was John Deere himself was a volunteer firefighter, and a lot of John Deere dealerships are in rural communities and even suburbs. One of the firehouses we focus on is just north of DC in a suburb here. And they wanted to use the film to recruit volunteers and recruit donations to volunteer fire departments. So we showed it at 350 fire departments across the country, and they used it to recruit volunteers. And 56% of them did recruit volunteers as a result, and over 60% got donations as a result. And that was made by 2 independent filmmakers from outside of Seattle who normally are making their passion projects, not funded by a brand. But this enabled them to make a little bit extra money, make a film that they did care about. They ended up, falling in love with the subject, and it would not have been possible to make that movie without that financing. It just spent the last 2 months on PBS and over 300 stations across the U.S. It's still playing in a few. But the success that it had, it would have been a very tiny independent film. It only got into a couple of film festivals. The film did not get major offers for distribution, nothing that paid the cost of what the film cost to make. But because they had a brand backing it, the brand could spend money on hiring our company to do a service deal theatrical and to do an impact campaign. And it had a much bigger success because of the brand support. Another project that's flashed up on here is a series of films about the climate pledge, Future Forward. And essentially what happened was Bezos put $1 billion into a nonprofit organization to try to get more companies to go carbon neutral before 2034, whatever the deadline is from the Paris Accords. And hundreds of companies are signing up for this. And in this case, we worked with award-winning documentary filmmakers who have won Emmys, Oscars, all women filmmakers. The producer is Sinan Kesgi, who's a woman producer who started a company called Majority specifically to get more women filmmakers working behind the camera on brands and advertising. And it was well-known filmmakers like Andi Timoner, and then some not as well-known but excellent filmmakers like Simia Khan Brahma, all of whom, if you talk to them, would say this was just another way for them to make money for their careers. And so making a film about JetBlue going carbon neutral more quickly is not going to be their passion project. Mm-hmm. But they were able to work with crews that they like to work with, pay those crews better than normal, pay themselves better than normal, and do their passion projects on the side, and it enables that. So I'm not saying everyone should jump into branded content or that it's going to save the world. And brands are not going to save our world in this political moment and the types of films that play this film festival, because brands aren't going to do major controversy and truth to power documentaries. So we need to be supporting public media. We need to be pushing for more foundation support for this sector, because those are the films that still need to get made and are not going to get made by capitalism. So I don't think it's going to save us by any means, but it can be one tool to help build a sustainable career. And what I've learned doing this is we work with companies that are as big as things like Anonymous Content and Imagine Entertainment and Hello Sunshine, that are big Hollywood companies. None of them could exist just making the movies they like to make, even for Hollywood. They exist and stay sustainable as businesses because they have brand divisions and they do advertising, and some of them have management companies as well, where they manage actors or directors, et cetera. But if you talk to them, they'll tell, like, their founders will tell you, we cannot pay the bills just making our movies that we love to make, even the ones that go to Hollywood. We have to have a four-legged stool that supports our sustainability. And that's also true for small independent companies that we work with. So we also work with very tiny companies that are essentially one filmmaker with a producer and a couple friends that are shooting and doing sound. And whether it's that small company or the big company, the reason they're able to survive is by having multiple types of work that they do so that they can pay their bills. And that's just it used to be you could count on as a filmmaker. All my documentary filmmaker friends were teachers, and they often in colleges. As we know, colleges and universities are increasingly going to adjunct professors and underpaying people there and not giving them health support. So those kind of side gigs are now not as lucrative as they used to be. And this can be just one other area that can help round out someone's career sustainability-wise. But I can't emphasize enough that brands are not coming to save the world by any means. They just might be one piece of your sustainability puzzle.
Before we talk with Jackie, if there's one, like, not looking at branded content and individual strategies to sort of pay the bills, but structurally, because you've had the perspective of working also in an organization that's kind of facing the industry or facing the field, structurally in terms of how filmmakers are compensated or the practice, I don't know, is there one sort of recommendation or suggestion you throw into the pool of ideas of a way forward?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of what I was saying before, but a different way of it is that you can't have all of your money coming from just one source, because if that source suddenly dries up, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So we saw that in multiple different ways during COVID, and we've seen that during the strikes and other things. And so the more that you can diversify your income streams, and even venture capitalists, that's what they do. They diversify what they invest in, because there's going to be one or two things that succeed and a lot of others that don't. And if all of a sudden Netflix, which has happened, is now buying approximately 50% less documentaries, if not more, than they were just 2 years ago. So the gravy train that was Netflix buying all of our documentaries is not happening anymore. If you were diversified already into multiple different income streams, then it doesn't matter as much when that goes away. But if you put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, then that becomes a problem. It's a privileged place to be. You have to work to get there. And the filmmakers I know who are successful, they are counting on multiple different, even like editors that I know, they're editing their, great film that they hope is going to premiere at Sundance and get onto Netflix, and they're also editing a commercial on the side, and they're editing a corporate piece on the side. They've got multiple income streams, and that's what I'm doing. I produced an independent film that just premiered at Woodstock. It's a fiction film called If You See Something, and we just had an announcement yesterday that we added Doug Liman as an executive producer in Deadline, and we're hoping to sell the film soon. My fee to produce that independent film, and we've been on it now 3 years, it'll probably be 2 more years before we make any money on the movie. My fee as a producer was $15,000 for that movie. I can't live on $15,000 for 4 years. So, but I can live on the income that comes from charging brands to distribute their films, and being able to do that passion project and have my newsletter and all these other things, because I diversified where that's coming from.
So you are the case study in that moment. So we've heard about community and sort of filmmaker support organizations. We've heard about broadening the definition to talk about safety and independence in contexts that are not necessarily the ones that we first think of in this room or in the US. We've looked at the strategy of branded content and diversifying income streams. And so Jackie, and I keep forgetting that I wanted to say Jacqueline, and because I know Jackie well, because she's somebody I've looked up to for a while. We're talking with someone who I don't know if you'd agree with me, I think you've kind of figured it out. Like you figured out how to keep making work that you care deeply about. And you may disagree, so we'll talk about that a bit. But just to give context, you spoke earlier about Always in Season, which was the film in 2009 at Sundance. Is that correct?
2019.
2019, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
forgetting one. 2019 at Sundance, to most recently, we're about to see just a 2-minute trailer for a series for Apple TV that you executive produced and you directed 2 of the episodes. So, I think for a lot of people, like, oh, that's a through line I'd like to, follow. So we want to hear a little bit about what you learned from that. But first, so you can see what the kind of work she's been able to do, we're going to show that 2-minute trailer from Lincoln's Dilemma, Apple TV.
What we're seeing today is dramatic evidence of what happens when you fail to talk honestly about your history. And it harkens to the mid-19th century during the Civil War. So Lincoln becomes important to reflect on the issues of division that we're seeing today.
Abraham Lincoln has outwitted just about as many historians as politicians of his own day. Unless you understand what is going on around what he is saying, you can never really understand Abraham Lincoln.
Lincoln did not start his presidency to be the great emancipator.
It's not a phrase Lincoln asked to be applied to himself, and we can do better.
Frederick Douglass is every bit the equal of the President of the United States.
He's constantly in Lincoln's ear, pushing him on Black humanity.
As the voices that have access to Lincoln change, Lincoln himself changes in response.
Lincoln's #1 agenda is unification. It is not the abolition of slavery.
Lincoln was forced to reckon with slavery due to Black people themselves.
He came to think that out of this would come something truly monumental.
Lincoln is talking about doing something pretty radical here.
Something really important inside of him was opening up.
He was trying to navigate the currents of really irreconcilable ideas.
Sustained a career that you've actually worked for organizations that have funded filmmakers, as well as the passion project that did the independent route and successfully out in the world, to work that, is it fair to say, commissioned work? Is that what we would?
It is.
Okay, so yeah, so what do you have to say about your own hopes for your career? Where we're headed, where we need to head in terms of sustainability.
I'm happy to talk about that. I'm going to give you a visual description in just a second, but I want to say, how many people sense that that's relevant right now, today, right? It's on Apple TV if you get a chance to watch. It's still there. 4 episodes. I directed 1 and 4, Barrett Goodman 2 and 3. And it's just so relevant. It was such a gift to be able to dig in with my team to find research on aspects of that history that had not been elevated yet. Just so exciting. Even as I watch the trailer, it's exciting to see the work that we did. I'm going to give a visual description. I am a Black woman, brown skin, shoulder-length hair, wearing a green sweater blazer and brown corduroy pants. I want to echo a few things that other people have said. Lailane talked about the importance of public television. It is so hugely important that we look for ways and additional and new ways that we support the continuation of public television. I worked for independent television service ITVS coming out of graduate school before I actually started a career as an independent filmmaker. I did that, and it was such it gave me such an understanding of the business side of filmmaking, in addition to the creative side, which is hugely important. I mentor a lot of filmmakers. I also executive produce projects, emerging filmmakers, all of them. I was just doing a mental inventory in my head this morning. All of them quite wonderfully women, many of them Black and brown women, and some of them trans, non-binary people, and all really brilliant and talented. And so that's part of my effort to make sure that the field is not just sustainable for me, but filmmakers like me and filmmakers who are coming through the pipeline, and that the sustainability is also around diverse stories and radical storytelling, and storytelling that pushes against the center. And really, my whole goal and what I've been doing, I have the really good fortune of being a Shorenstein Center Fellow at Harvard University, and have been really digging into issues of equity around distribution as the landscape changes. But also in my work and in that research is looking at ways that we elevate the process, that we don't just replicate the structures that have already been in place around creating. Because once you have the goal of diversifying the content, then you can't continue to create in the same way, right? And so how do we elevate that content and elevate the process of creating so that that content is more elevated? And we did a bit of that in Lincoln's Dilemma, which I was really excited about.
Cool, cool, cool. I appreciate it. Some things, there's so much, and I really do want to shift within 30 seconds to hearing from you all. Some things that, there's so much in you guys' stories, but there's certain interventions or places along the pipeline that folks have experienced that didn't even come out in this, but may come up here in terms of, perhaps being part of a slate of work like ADOC has done, or part of a community like Brown Girls Doc Mafia, or D-Word, things that I know like I can speak to personally, where there's been advice or mentorship or equipment or, labor. We're talking about advocacy in terms of uplifting voices that aren't normally heard, just the nitty-gritty of how we make money, but also fellowships and residencies and those types of things. I just want to throw some things out here as we turn towards the audience. The different, not necessarily collective bargaining units, we're not there yet, but in terms of collectively aggregating our power to change industry practices, like the Documentary Producers Alliance, a few years back, introducing new guidelines on the waterfall in terms of how filmmakers are compensated when work does get picked up and distributed. The Archival Producers Alliance that's talking about best practices for AI. Forward Doc, Undocumented Filmmakers Collective, I mentioned Brown Girls Doc Mafia, that exist as communities, which is, I think, key to sustainability, but also are actually introducing and pushing for changes in the way we actually practice the work. It changes in the way the industry practices itself. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. They may not be the entire ecosystem that we're trying to build. There's some systemic stuff that we're going to have to work at. But in terms of, in the meantime, what are we doing to support ourselves? What can the institutions that have resources do to support us? I just wanted to sort of throw that into the conversation. So Jackie, this is a little different from what we rehearsed, but what question would you throw out to the audience? How would you kick it to the audience? What would you throw out?
Yeah, I have I want to also elevate Firelight Media, by the way.
Absolutely.
All of those organizations have been really hugely important in my career. I'm curious from you all about how you define sustainability. I think about when I came into the industry, and also when I first just started watching docs. The idea was that you made a film and that you sold that film at a festival like Sundance, and then you made the idea, right, very uninformed, but that you made like millions of dollars and that's how you sustained a career, right? That is so far from what actually exists now and has existed for a very long time. And when we talk about sustainability, I don't know even that we've defined what that means as an industry in a way that's really meaningful. So I'm curious about you all and how you define what would be sustainable for you.
So I see a hand here, and then I see, I see Natalie there, and then I saw one over here. That'll be our first three. Did I see somebody over here? Okay, so yes. So one here, and then we'll go to Natalie. And I thought I saw a hand over here, but we'll pick somebody on that side of the room. Okay.
Hi, thanks so much. Mr. Newman, I'd just like to know percentage-wise, ballpark, how many of the products that you deal with have fiscal sponsorship? And in terms of sustainability, this is for anybody on the panel, how important is fiscal sponsorship? And what aspects should you consider before deciding whether or not to receive that?
Yeah, so the projects I'm working on are fully financed by the marketing departments of these brands, so they don't have fiscal sponsorship at all because it's not necessary because the brands aren't looking for a tax write-off. The majority of films that I've worked on in my career, the majority of documentary filmmakers that I know, probably the majority of documentary films that are playing at this film festival and at other film festivals do have fiscal sponsorship, and it is extremely important because it in multiple different ways, but it allows you to tap into foundation and donor support and get the tax write-off. And with a good fiscal sponsor, which not all of them are, but with a good one, they also can sometimes help with bringing credibility to the project, and some will even help with some of the financial and the bookkeeping. Not all of them do, only a few do, but it's usually a crucial piece of the puzzle to have fiscal sponsorship for your project.
Just to follow up, and how important is maintaining creative control through these contracts?
Yeah, so if you're going to work with brands at all, you should negotiate in the beginning when you're signing your contract what your level of creative control is. And all of the films that I'm showing up there, and the majority of them that we've ever worked on at my company, the filmmakers keep creative control in final cut. And that's contractually bound. And the brands understand that because we consult with them and we explain to them, you're making a movie, not a commercial. If you want a filmmaker to be able to stand on the stage at this film festival and say this is a real movie, they need to be able to say they had creative control in final cut. And you need to fight for that when you do this work. Now, sometimes you work with brands and it's, for a corporate video or an advertisement, and you may not have that creative control. But if it's a movie that you're trying to take out, you want to keep that creative control.
Cool. Let's go to Natalie.
Hey.
And then if there's somebody over here who's going to be ready next, anybody? We'll come to you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for this, this really provocative panel. To answer Jackie's question, I think sustainability would be being able to do filmmaking full-time and not have to do anything else. And I think that, to Jackie's point, there has not been sustainability generally for the majority of filmmakers. And as time has passed, and certainly once that quote-unquote golden era of documentary filmmaking sort of burst, it seems harder and harder. I just want to lift up the idea that the same inequity and inequality that we see in our larger society is present in documentary. So the hierarchy of who gets money, who gets to tell certain stories, all of that is baked into considerations around sustainability. And I would love to hear what you all think about how we address the root core, why we are even in a situation as we presently face in documentary, where so many folks, are not able to live. They cannot make a living, and they have to do multiple things, which is not sustainable. It's the opposite of sustainability.
Or we take 12 years to make our films.
Exactly.
Can I answer
so we
that?
get Jackie and Zeena.
It's such an important point, Natalie. Sustainability, you were talking about for fiction film, it's a 4-legged stool. It's like an 8 or 12-legged stool for documentary filmmakers. There are just so many ways. And it's also part of being an entrepreneur, right, is you're open to stretching in the ways that you are looking at how to economically make your business viable. That's really foundational, but it's also, it can be unmanageable for most filmmakers. And I've had incredible opportunities. I've made films for public television. I've made films like the commission film for streamers. And your question around editorial control is a really important question as we start to look at the way the distribution landscape has changed. And so I've always insisted on editorial control on all of my projects. And so the exception to that is commission projects for streamers. And because those streamers come with whatever the tens of millions of dollars are of funding at the beginning when they hire you, you don't have to do the fundraising. Then there's shared editorial control, and there are questions around equity and around voice and how fully, and particularly for filmmakers, because I started in filmmaking later in my life, and because I didn't start in my 20s, for example, is that I have a sense of agency and can advocate and really make sure that my voice is prioritized as a director of a project. But the younger filmmakers can very easily acquiesce to questions about the way a story is told, or even what story is told, depending on the level contractually of editorial control that they have, and that can vary. And so I think people should know that. We talked about the golden age, and I hadn't really thought of this as a golden age, but it probably is. 8 years to 5 years ago, it was, and when I was 4 years ago or so is when I first started to get these opportunities that were really pretty amazing to work with streamers. They still are pretty amazing for a lot of reasons. But that was not the first golden age since I've been interested in film. There was a golden age when Michael Moore and Ken Burns and Morgan Spurlock were making documentaries, and in terms of the popularity. And notice that I mentioned all white men, right? So there have been many golden ages, and this too will pass. This window of opportunity with streamers will pass, and so the question is, how are we present in the restructuring of what distribution opportunities look like for filmmakers? And to Natalie's point is that the filmmakers, just as with people in society, those who institutionally have been, their voices have been suppressed, or their participation has been suppressed or not even involved at all. Those filmmakers that we consider from marginalized communities are the filmmakers who have the most at stake around voice, around sustainability, and have thought about it deeply and can really be part of the solutions. And so I think it's important that we support their voices, support their work, and also their inclusion into figuring out what this next iteration of distribution is going to look like and where the next golden age is going.
Yeah, I just want to speak a bit about systemically some of the things that we're thinking about. And when it comes to funding and systems of funding, one of the things that we as a network are going to start piloting, and something we really are encouraging other cultural institutions and funding organizations to think about, is like a simple but profound shift from being project-facing to filmmaker-facing. And over the pandemic, I was lucky enough to actually be involved in a lot of our research into this idea of a filmmaker's basic income inspired by UBI systems. So we saw, UBI pilots, universal basic income pilots that have happened in, for artists specifically, in San Francisco, in New York, in Ireland. And interestingly, we as a community did not really, over the pandemic, take on a big systemic change to think about, can we fund filmmakers with UBI? Can we give filmmakers a monthly income, and trust that they will make their work, and instead of it being so project-facing? Because I think, when we speak to filmmakers who we fund and who are part of our community and who we've spoken to with these interviews, the project-facing funding is just not working all the time. There's a lot of, I'm just going to say it plainly, there's a lot of nepotism when it comes to funding and documentary. A lot of it is about connections, and people are not always equally funded or get equal opportunities to funding. So we are calling, and I think we were Flamina in Lebanon. We're going to pilot, and hopefully we'll still be able to pilot a UBI-based funding scheme for filmmakers. And the other systemic thing that we're thinking about globally is that money needs to be held by regional and local cultural institutions. It cannot be a monopoly of the global north determining who gets funded, when they get funded. We need to shift the money outside of here. And that is something at Disco we're thinking about deeply, and we're going to try to pilot. But I would just encourage anyone who's from an institution that could pilot such of a thing to think about it, to speak to us. And for filmmakers, if you're in conversation with cultural organizations, to just encourage them to think beyond the current system, because there's a reason why we're at where we're at, and that's partly because the system is just deeply flawed.
I'm going to come to is a person? Okay, thank you. Lailane, I wanted to just ask you from ADOC's perspective, what are some of the things that you all are working, if you had an influx of support to support your organization, what are some of the things that you would be addressing structurally as you support filmmakers? And then we had a question here, right?
Yeah, I definitely think, with our microdoc series and our storytelling initiative, we've been able to really help emerging filmmakers get opportunities to create these really microdocs that end up becoming kind of like a calling card, but it's led a lot of our filmmakers to get other projects or being able to kind of build that portfolio for them. And then we also have our impact initiative where we're supporting, we piloted supporting impact campaigns for 3 film teams, and then, an impact fellowship where we're supporting the seeds of their project. And so being able to kind of redirect funds to go directly to filmmakers to support their projects has been really valuable, for us to really get, filmmakers the opportunities that they need because there is a lack of funding and access.
Okay. So as we go, and I'm sorry, I don't remember where the hand was. Oh, it was over here. I'm sorry. Okay. I said that to him. Yes, please go.
Thank you. A lot of the discussion has been about sustainability with funding and money, which obviously makes sense, but I wonder if you guys can talk about sustainability in the sense of like mental health. For me, like I realize now how lucky I was 10 years ago when I started making documentaries, because I had a full-time job working at this new startup in Miami called Fusion, where I was on this investigative team and we made hour-long docs, but we had full-time jobs and we had vacation, and we were allowed to work on these films for like a year each. I love that process. I love making films. 10 years later, I'm teaching at a university and doing an independent film, and just the mental wear on me of teaching 4 classes, running the student TV news show, trying to raise money, filming a documentary where I live in Baltimore City about police brutality, and like always running out of money, not knowing, I don't know that I'm succeeding in the sense that I have funding and distribution with PBS, but I don't know that I can ever do this again because it's been so hard. And I imagine there are other people here in the room that relate, where I'm like, I don't know if this was worth it. Like just the stress and being so alone, even though I've had the opportunity to be in doc labs and things like that. Can you talk about the mental health part of sustainability of this job?
Excellent. That is an excellent theme for us to close on, our well-being, our mental health. So please share. What are you hearing? What are people proposing? If you don't have any, go ahead. I know that. Oh yes, go ahead, Jackie.
I definitely don't have the answer. It's the question that I've asked myself, is how do I sustain a career in which I'm making films about topics as weighty as lynching, racial terrorism, and all kinds of things that are really important, but and also in the process of creating, right, is I'm creating within these systems that I am addressing, right? And so how do I sustain my mental health when I am getting pushback inside the teams in which I am creating, right? And having to do that work and navigate that work on top of the very heady work of creating and being an artist. And so I don't have any answers that's a package deal that you can like take but maybe what I do will help is that I make sure that I am creating in other ways. And so I sculpt, I make jewelry, I make some of the jewelry that I'm wearing now. I do all kinds of things as an artistic outlet, one, so that I can have an immediate result, which is hugely helpful when you're making films over a long period of time. But also for me, it's therapeutic. There's a point at which if I don't create, then it starts to just seep out. And so I have to be very purposeful about that. But also I seek therapy, and I try to do that regularly. And it's been ongoing to be able to talk through some of the trauma that you're experiencing as you are documenting other people's trauma is really hugely helpful. And then the process of making films for me is therapeutic. It's how I can address these issues and what I can do. as a form of activism as well. And so that's really helpful for me.
I'm really sorry, but they're going to make a shift because we have another panel starting in 5 minutes. I don't feel happy about that question hanging, but I do think it's important.
There is a woman who's been going around to film festivals with a new organization. Does anyone here know the name of it? I can't remember.
Documentality.
And
then
if you go
also-
on D-Word, they've recently had a whole session on mental health and documentary filmmakers, so you can find it. They've got resources for filmmakers.
Yeah, I would also add that even the documentary accountability work group, that work, even though it's focused on participants, I think it is absolutely directly relevant to this conversation of well-being as part of sustainability. And I'm sorry, Zeena, but I just want to say that the fact that it is the last question, I know there are folks here are asking, what does the field want? What does the field want who have resources and can allocate resources? So this question of sustainability and community as focused on well-being and not just sort of monetary streams, I think is really critical, and I hope that that's a takeaway that comes from today. But thank you all.
Let me just add that funders are allowing that as a budget item as
Exactly.
well. And so to
Yes.
budget it in.
And I just want to say, from a funding organization, we're thinking about it a lot. It's not we are not sufficiently tackling it, but we're trying. And one of the things about becoming filmmaker facing and not project facing is to do with our thinking about mental health. So,
thank you.
Thank you for bringing it up, though. It's such an important conversation
Absolutely.
to have.
Yeah.
I wish we had more
Absolutely.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.